Elliot Lancaster's heart pounded as he stared at the ancient Mandarin characters on the contract. His $500 million deal was slipping through his fingers. No translator could make sense of it. Just then, the janitor, Renee, stepped forward, her voice calm. "I can help. I learned it with the monks." In that moment, everything changed. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's dive in. Elliot Lancaster stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment, looking out over the glittering skyline of New York City. It was early morning, the golden light of dawn just beginning to reflect off the glass towers in the distance. He ran a hand through his perfectly groomed hair, straightened his designer suit, and checked his watch. The moment he'd been waiting for was finally here. The deal that would secure his company's place among the most powerful in the world. Today, he was set to close a $500 million deal with a Chinese conglomerate. His company had worked for months to get everything lined up, the negotiations so intense that even the most seasoned executives in the industry had acknowledged it would be the deal of the century. Elliot was no stranger to high-stakes business. He'd made millions by keeping his cool in stressful situations, navigating complex negotiations with the precision of a surgeon. The world bent to his will. With every move, he increased his empire, and every victory reinforced his belief that wealth and status were the only true currencies that mattered. As his assistant, Claire, entered the room, her face betraying a hint of concern, he quickly turned his attention to the details. "Everything's in place," she said, walking over to the desk with the contract. "The final translation of the Mandarin clause is ready, but there's a last-minute issue." Elliot didn't even flinch. "What's the problem? We've double-checked everything." "It's not the translation, sir. It's the ancient Mandarin section. The contract requires an expert's review. No one's been able to fully confirm the meaning." She handed him a set of documents, pointing to the complicated symbols. Elliot glanced at the page, irritation creeping up his spine. "We've paid for the best translators. I don't have time for this. We're closing today, Claire. Make it happen." Meanwhile, in the building's dimly lit halls, Renee James pushed her cleaning cart past the towering glass doors. It was early morning, and most of the office workers were either rushing in or out, unaware of the quiet presence of the woman who cleaned their spaces. Her uniform, simple and faded, didn't draw attention. Her hands, rough from years of labor, moved with practiced ease as she wiped down surfaces and tidied the spaces she was responsible for. She was used to being invisible. Renee had been working in this building for over a decade, long enough to see the CEOs, investors, and tech moguls come and go. To them, she was just another face, another person who could be replaced in a heartbeat. But to her, this was a place where she could find quiet, reflect on the teachings of the monks she had worked with years ago, and still make enough to survive. Her work had always been secondary to the deeper lessons she had learned in the monasteries. She'd lived and worked alongside monks in remote corners of Asia, where the simplicity of life and the depth of wisdom had reshaped her. The ancient Mandarin she had learned was a gift, one she never expected to use, but one that had become a part of her. She didn't feel the need to share her knowledge. Her path had always been humble, but there was a part of her, quiet, deeply ingrained, that knew she wasn't just a janitor. She was more than that. She had always known there would come a moment where her years of patience and learning would be called upon. As she pushed her cart past a gleaming conference room where Elliot Lancaster's team gathered, Renee caught a glimpse of the contract sitting on the table. Her gaze lingered on the ancient characters. She recognized them instantly. A sense of familiarity tugged at her chest. Her mind flickered back to the monks, those years spent in peace, studying languages that transcended time. Suddenly, she heard voices inside the room, raised in urgency. "We can't close the deal without the translation." Elliot's voice cracked through the air, his frustration palpable. "There's nothing more we can do, Mr. Lancaster. The Mandarin in this section is too rare. No one can decipher it quickly enough," a translator said, his voice hesitant. Renee paused, listening. It was hard to ignore the tension in the room, and an overwhelming instinct tugged at her. She slowly stepped closer to the door, a sense of calm overtaking the anxiety she usually kept tightly hidden. Elliot's voice grew louder, and his frustration was palpable. "We don't have time for this. The entire deal could fall apart if we can't get this contract signed today." Renee's gaze fell back to the page again. She knew what this moment was. A test. She stood silently for a moment before, almost without thinking, she stepped into the room.
The room fell silent when she entered. A few people glanced up, surprised to see the janitor in the middle of the high-powered discussion. "I can help," Renee said, her voice low but steady. Elliot turned toward her, incredulous. "You? Help? Do you even know what you're talking about?" "I do," she replied, her tone unwavering. "I've studied this language. I learned it with monks over many years. It's not just translation, it's understanding." For a moment, Elliot couldn't believe his ears. What was a janitor talking about ancient Mandarin? He opened his mouth to dismiss her, but stopped, realizing there was no time for arrogance. The panic in the room was palpable. Desperation had a way of stripping away pride. "You've studied this language?" Elliot asked, his voice tight, still skeptical. Renee nodded calmly. "Yes, it'll only take a minute." Her words, simple and direct, hung in the air. The room waited, as if collectively holding its breath. Renee moved toward the table, her hand steady, as she carefully picked up the contract. As she looked over the ancient characters, something inside her shifted. She was no longer just the janitor. In this moment, she was the bridge between two worlds, one of power and one of patience. She closed her eyes for a second, grounding herself, then began to translate. The room was heavy with tension as Renee stood by the table, her fingers lightly brushing the ancient Mandarin characters. Elliot's sharp gaze was fixed on her, but he said nothing. His team looked on, exchanging uncertain glances. This wasn't just about translating a contract, it was about everything. The $500 million deal was the linchpin of his empire, and yet here stood this janitor, claiming to know something no one else did. Renee's pulse was steady, her mind calm. She wasn't nervous. This was what she had been waiting for, though she hadn't anticipated it would come this way. She bent over the contract and whispered to herself, her lips moving in soft motion. The symbols weren't just letters to her. They were fragments of history, of knowledge passed down over centuries. This wasn't the Mandarin most people knew. This was something older, more delicate. It was a bridge to another time, and to her it felt like home. Her fingers hovered over the contract, and she began to speak softly, translating each character as she went. The words flowed easily from her, the translation seamless, despite the complexity of the ancient text. Elliot stood frozen, watching her every move. He expected stumbles, hesitations, even a mistake, but Renee's voice was clear, her confidence unwavering. She was translating not just the words, but the meaning, the soul behind them. She wasn't just a janitor. She was the gatekeeper to knowledge he didn't even know existed. The room was still, the air thick with disbelief. The tension was almost insurmountable as she finished the final line of text. "I've completed it," Renee said quietly, looking up at Elliot with calm assurance.
Elliot stared at her for a long moment. His mouth went dry. This wasn't possible. A janitor, someone who would likely never stepped into the world of high finance or international business, had just saved the most important deal of his life. And she had done it in less than a minute. How? Elliot stammered, a look of disbelief creeping into his eyes. He'd never been in this position, helpless, caught off guard. His carefully constructed world was shattering before his eyes. Renee met his gaze, her expression not one of arrogance, but something far more powerful, knowledge. "I learned it over the years," she said simply. "The monks I worked with taught me more than just words. They taught me patience, respect, and the value of things not often seen. Language is not just about translation, it's about understanding." A long silence filled the room. Elliot couldn't find the words to respond. Every part of him wanted to reject what she had done, to shout that she wasn't qualified, that she wasn't even supposed to be there. But he couldn't, not after what she had just accomplished. His team was still silent, looking at Renee with a mixture of awe and confusion. This is incredible," Claire finally spoke up, her voice breaking the tension. "She's right, Mr. Lancaster. It's accurate. Every word." Elliot turned back to the contract, then at the team surrounding him. They were nodding, some even whispering under their breath. There were no mistakes in the translation, none at all. It was flawless. The ancient Mandarin was now fully understood, and the deal could proceed. But Elliot didn't feel victorious. Instead, something unfamiliar gnawed at him, a humbling realization. He looked at Renee again, the janitor who had just changed the course of everything. How had she known? And why was it that someone like her had this power, this knowledge, while he, someone who could buy anything, was so helpless in this moment? Renee, for all the praise that began to flood the room, didn't seek it. She stood still as though she had only done what was natural, what was expected. Her expression remained unchanged, her eyes soft, almost distant. She had seen this before. People's reactions to her wisdom, they were always shocked, always surprised. But Renee had learned long ago to keep her wisdom quiet, to hide her strength behind the ordinary exterior of a janitor. She had never sought recognition, only the peace that came from learning and understanding. "Thank you," Elliot said, his voice a bit hoarse. It was the first time in the meeting he'd spoken with any real sincerity. Renee nodded, but her eyes never wavered. She didn't need his gratitude. She had done what she was meant to do. She had followed the lessons of the monks, to serve, to help, and to let go of the ego. Her task was finished. But before she could turn to leave, Elliot spoke again. His voice different this time. "Wait." Renee paused but didn't look back. She wasn't sure why he had called her, but she felt an uneasy shift in the air. "I need to understand," Elliot said, his voice soft but insistent. "How did you learn all this? Why didn't you tell anyone? Why did you hide it?"
Renee's hand paused on the doorframe, her fingers brushing the wood. She thought for a moment, her mind drifting back to the years spent in silence with the monks. Years spent learning not just words, but wisdom. "Because it wasn't about recognition," she said quietly. "It was about understanding myself." With that, she stepped out of the room, leaving Elliot alone with his thoughts. As Renee walked back down the hallway, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. She had done what was necessary, but it wasn't about her. It wasn't about making her mark. She had always lived in the background, quiet, content with her place in the world. But today, something shifted. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was a woman who had changed the course of history with her knowledge. Back in the conference room, Elliot sat in stunned silence. His mind raced. This wasn't just about a business deal anymore.
It was about the person who had made it all possible, someone he had never even considered as anything more than a background figure, Renee. He realized in that moment that there was much more to her than met the eye, much more than what he had assumed. And for the first time, Elliot wondered what other wisdom he might have missed by only ever seeing things through his own lens, his own narrow, limited world of wealth and control. As the team began to discuss the next steps, Elliot's thoughts were far away, on the woman who had unlocked the answers he had been searching for, without asking for anything in return. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and preparations for the final signing of the deal. But no matter how much Elliot tried to focus on the business, his mind kept wandering back to that moment in the conference room. The moment when Renee had stepped forward and solved the problem he thought was insurmountable. At first, he couldn't shake the sense of embarrassment. He was the CEO, a man who had built an empire from the ground up. He had the best resources, the smartest people on his team, and yet a janitor had been the one to save the day. Every time he thought about it, his pride stung. He had doubted her at first, dismissed her, and now she had proven him wrong. Worse, she had done it with such ease as if it had been no challenge at all. It wasn't just about the business, it was about his ego, his need to be the one with all the answers. He wasn't used to feeling so small, so powerless. The morning after the translation, Elliot spent hours alone in his office, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. Part of him wanted to reach out to Renee, to apologize, to acknowledge her. But the other part of him recoiled. What could he possibly say? How could he reconcile his world of polished suits and multi-million-dollar deals with her quiet strength and humble wisdom? He found himself caught between two worlds. On one hand, there was his position of power, the identity he had spent his life building. On the other, there was Renee, someone who had quietly humbled him in a way he couldn't explain. Renee, for her part, hadn't thought much about the incident after she left the conference room. She knew she had done what was necessary. But as the days passed, she felt a subtle unease growing within her. The people around her, especially Elliot, seemed to view her differently now. She could sense it in the way they looked at her. Respect, yes, but also a certain distance, as if they were unsure of how to treat her now that they knew what she was capable of. She wasn't used to being seen as anything other than invisible. She had no desire for the spotlight. Her life had always been about quiet service, about giving without expecting anything in return. But now, the whispers had started. She had interrupted their world, disrupted the expectations they had for people like her. As she cleaned a hallway outside Elliot's office, she overheard snippets of conversation. People speculating about her, questioning her background. "Did you hear? She speaks ancient Mandarin. Where did she even learn that?" The voices weren't unkind, but they weren't fully accepting either. There was a sense of disbelief, as if they couldn't reconcile her role in the office with the knowledge she carried. They didn't understand her, and that bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She had never wanted to be part of their world. She had always preferred the quiet, peaceful corners of life where she could simply be. But now, for the first time, she began to feel like an outsider in a place that had never truly seen her for who she was. In the days following the contract signing, Elliot's internal battle continued. He couldn't escape the pull of his ego, the part of him that wanted to control everything. His world was built on the idea that money, status, and power were the most important currencies. But with Renee's unexpected intervention, his worldview had been shaken to its core. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he hadn't fully processed what had happened. He hadn't acknowledged the true value of what Renee had done, not just for the company, but for him personally. She hadn't just solved a business problem, she had taught him something deeper. But admitting that a janitor had taught him anything, felt like an insult to everything he had worked for. He had spent years cultivating his reputation, his authority, and the idea that he was above others. If he acknowledged Renee's wisdom, it would mean tearing down the very foundation of his identity. So he did what he knew best. He shut her out. He kept his distance, telling himself it was better that way. After all, what did he really owe her? She was just a janitor, wasn't she? The next time he saw Renee in the hallway, he nodded curtly, barely acknowledging her presence. She didn't react, just nodded back, her expression unreadable. It stung more than he cared to admit. Why couldn't he just let go of his pride? Renee noticed the shift in Elliot immediately. The warmth and gratitude he had shown her the day of the translation seemed to have evaporated. Now he barely looked at her, as if she were just another part of the building, just another piece of furniture to be ignored. At first, Renee was hurt. She had never expected anything from Elliot, certainly not his praise or recognition, but the abrupt change in his attitude left a sting, one she couldn't quite shake. She had thought, for a moment, that he saw her for what she truly was, not a janitor, but a person of value, someone who had something to offer. But now, she was just the same invisible figure she had always been. Still, she did her work without complaint, silently cleaning the halls and offices, keeping to herself as always. The old Renee would have let it go, would have continued her routine without question. But this time, there was a subtle shift within her. She had brought change, and now, it seemed, she was being forced to let it slip away. One afternoon, a major crisis hit Elliot's company. An unexpected issue with another part of the deal threatened to derail everything. Elliot found himself in a corner, unable to make the right decision. The pressure was mounting, and he needed someone to talk to. He walked past Renee in the hallway and stopped, his mind racing. For the first time in days, the barriers of pride seemed to melt away. He knew he needed her help, even if it meant admitting his weakness. He turned to face her. "Renee," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I need to talk." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" I don't know what to do. I thought I had everything under control, but now it feels like I'm losing everything." Renee studied him for a long moment. She had always known that his power was fragile. She could see it now in his eyes, in the way his usual confidence faltered. "I don't have the answers for you, Elliot," she said gently, "but I can listen. Sometimes that's all anyone really needs." For a moment, Elliot didn't speak. He simply stood there, overwhelmed by the realization that the person he had pushed away was the one person who might actually understand. In the days that followed, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had taken root inside him. The crisis with the deal had been resolved, barely, but it had exposed something deeper than just business concerns. It exposed the walls he had built around himself, walls that were slowly starting to crumble. He couldn't deny it any longer. He needed Renee, not just for her knowledge or skills, but for her wisdom, the quiet strength she carried with her. It was a humbling realization, and one that he wasn't prepared for. The last thing Elliot wanted was to admit to himself that someone who worked in the background had the power to change the course of his life. Yet there it was. Renee had done something no one else could. And now, as he sat alone in his office, staring at his reflection in the window, the familiar feeling of pride clashed with the dawning awareness that maybe his previous way of thinking, the way that kept him in control, on top, wasn't the answer after all. Renee's presence in the office felt different now, though.
There was a tension in the air between them that neither of them knew how to navigate. She continued her work quietly, moving through the halls, but she could feel the shift in Elliot's demeanor whenever he passed her. It wasn't the warmth from before. It was cold, detached. But everything changed the moment a new crisis arose, one that would force their paths to cross again. The company's international dealings were in jeopardy once more. Another complex translation issue had cropped up, one that was even more obscure than the last. A Chinese partner had presented a contract with multiple layers of ancient dialects, not just Mandarin. No one on the team could decipher it, and without it, the deal would fall apart. Elliot, already weary from the stress of the past few weeks, walked down the hallway, determined to fix the problem on his own. He was determined to prove that he could handle things without relying on Renee again. But as he passed by the supply closet, he stopped. Renee was there, putting away cleaning supplies. For a moment, he hesitated. The pull of pride was strong. He could call his high-priced translators and get it done the right way. But that nagging voice inside him, the one that had been steadily growing louder, reminded him of the humility he had learned the hard way. "Renee," Elliot called out. She turned, surprised to see him standing there, the tension in his posture clear. "Yes, Mr. Lancaster." "I need your help," he said, his voice almost reluctant. "There's another translation issue, and I'm not sure who else could handle it." Renee studied him carefully, the warmth in her eyes returning, but this time there was no rush to her movements. "I'm listening." A quiet agreement was formed between them, one born out of necessity, but also an unspoken acknowledgement that their previous interactions had shifted something deeper. Renee had always believed that true wisdom was never about force. It was about flow, about knowing when to step in and when to stay silent. She had learned this from the monks, and now she could see that Elliot needed to learn it too. They walked into the conference room together, the stark contrast between their worlds suddenly more palpable. Elliot, in his sleek custom suit, looked out of place next to Renee, who was dressed in her janitor's uniform, but there was an understanding between them now that had not existed before. The room was tense, filled with the usual crowd of high-powered professionals who were used to solving problems with money, power, or connections. But no one had an answer for this contract, not even the best linguists. Renee took a seat at the head of the table, her quiet confidence slowly filling the room. She wasn't intimidated by the weight of the corporate world around her. She had spent years in the shadows, but she was used to finding clarity in chaos, to seeking out the deeper truths beneath surface-level interactions. Elliot, for the first time, sat beside her, his posture more relaxed than it had been in days. He had finally let go of the need to control everything, and was willing to trust her expertise, something he'd never thought he would do. As Renee began to translate, her voice calm and steady, Elliot watched in awe as the words flowed from her without hesitation. There was no complexity too great for her to understand, no dialect too obscure for her to understand. The more she translated, the more Elliot found himself listening, not just to the words, but to the meaning behind them.
Mandarin. She was a woman who had lived a life rich in experiences, one that had shaped her into someone who could handle much more than the world had ever given her credit for. For the first time in years, Elliot found himself out of his element, unsure of the next move, unsure of how to navigate the situation. And yet, for the first time, he didn't mind. He was learning that it was okay to ask for help, to admit vulnerability, and that strength didn't always come from standing alone at the top. Renee, on the other hand, had always been content in the background, in the role of helper, provider, and caretaker. But as she sat there, translating with precision and confidence, she couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. This was the life she had chosen, one of humility and quiet strength. But in this room, for the first time, she was being recognized for her true value, for the depth of her knowledge and her ability to solve problems that no one else could. Her inner sense of worth, once so carefully hidden, now began to come into the light. She didn't need to be more than what she was. She simply needed to be herself, and that was enough. As the last of the translations was finished, there was a moment of silence in the room. The deal was back on track. The language barrier cleared, and the tension that had plagued the company for days had evaporated. But as Elliot stood to thank her, his voice caught in his throat. He looked at Renee, truly looked at her for the first time, and realized that the real value of what she had done wasn't just in the translation. It was in the quiet wisdom she had brought with her, the wisdom he had so desperately needed and yet had failed to recognize until now. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice full of genuine appreciation. "You didn't just solve a problem, you saved this deal, and in some ways you saved me." Renee met his gaze, her eyes soft. "I didn't save you, Elliot. You did that yourself. You just needed to be willing to see it." For the first time, Elliot didn't respond with a quip, a business tactic, or a plan for the next step. He simply stood in awe of the woman who had changed his life without ever asking for anything in return. The following days were marked by a strange peace. Elliot had become more approachable, more grounded. The deal had been saved and the company was moving forward, but something had shifted inside him. He had started seeking Renee out, not just for business matters, for casual conversation, asking her questions about her life, about the things she had learned. It was during one of these quiet conversations, when the office had emptied out for the evening, that Elliot found himself sitting across from Renee, his curiosity getting the better of him. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, navigating complex deals, but never had he met someone like her. Someone who held so much depth and wisdom, yet who moved through the world with such humility. "Renee," he said softly, his gaze focused on her as she wiped down the last of the tables in the conference room, "I know you don't like talking about yourself, but I have to ask, how did you learn all of this? The ancient Mandarin, I mean, and why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Renee paused for a moment, her hand still in her hand, before she set it down. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She knew this question was coming. It always did. But this time, there was something different in her. She felt the weight of her past, but she also felt the peace that had come with it. "Do you really want to know?" she asked, her voice gentle. Elliot nodded, the intrigue clear on his face. "I do." The years with the monks. Renee sat back in her chair, her hands folded in front of her, and for the first time she let herself speak freely. Her voice was calm, steady, as if she were recalling something both distant and deeply personal. "When I was younger, I didn't have much. I was born in a small town in the south, raised by my grandmother. She was a strong woman, but we didn't have money and we didn't have opportunity. I learned early on that if I wanted anything, I had to work for it. But there was always something inside of me, a quiet pull to something deeper. I decided to leave everything behind. I left the town, left my family behind, and went to live with the monks. I spent years with them, learning not just language, but life. They taught me things no school could ever teach. Patience, understanding, silence. Elliot's eyes widened, fascinated. "But how did you end up working as a janitor here? You could have done anything." Renee gave a small laugh, but it wasn't one of humor. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement of life's unpredictability. "I didn't go to the monastery to become famous or to find a better life. I went to find peace.
The monks taught me that you don't need the world's approval to find fulfillment. It's not about what others think of you, it's about what you give to the world. She stood up, walking to the window, gazing out at the city. When I came back to the United States, I didn't want to be anyone's anything. I didn't want to play the game. I wanted peace, and I found it in simple things. I took a job as a janitor here because I could live quietly, and it gave me the time I needed to continue my journey. As she turned back to face Elliot, her expression softened, but her eyes were steady. The Mandarin, that's something I never expected to use. The monks, they taught me languages, yes, but more than that, they taught me how to listen. They taught me how to see beyond the words, how to connect to the deeper meaning behind everything. Elliot's brow furrowed. But how did you end up working as a janitor here? You could have done anything. Renee gave a small laugh, but it wasn't one of humor. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement of life's unpredictability. I didn't go to the monastery to become famous or to find a better life. I went to find peace. The monks taught me that you don't need the world's approval to find fulfillment. It's not about what others think of you. It's about what you give to the world. She stood up, walking to the window, gazing out at the city. When I came back to the United States, I didn't want to be anyone's anything. I didn't want to play the game. I wanted peace, and I found it in simple things. I took a job as a janitor here because I could live quietly, and it gave me the time I needed to continue my journey. As she turned back to face Elliot, her expression softened, but her eyes were steady. The Mandarin, that's something I never expected to use. The monks, they taught me languages, yes, but more than that, they taught me how to listen. They taught me how to see beyond the words, how to connect to the deeper meaning behind everything. Elliot's brow furrowed. But why ancient Mandarin? Why that specifically? Renee smiled again, and there was a gentle warmth in her smile. The monks believed that language was a gateway to understanding the soul of a culture. Ancient Mandarin, especially the dialect I learned, was a language that connected people with the past, with history. The monks taught me to see the beauty in it, and it became more than just a language to me. It was a bridge between the world I had left and the world I had come to understand. Elliot sat back, taking it all in. He had assumed that Renee's knowledge was just an accident, a coincidence, but now he saw how deep it ran, how much more she had given to the world than he could have ever imagined. "I had no idea," he murmured, his voice full of awe. "You've lived a life most people would never understand. All this time I thought I was the one who understood the world, but you've seen things I couldn't even fathom." Renee paused, taking a breath. "It's not about seeing the world the way others do, Elliot. It's about seeing it clearly, without the noise, without the ego. I've had more peace in my life than I think anyone in your world could imagine, and I've never needed anything more." Elliot sat in stunned silence. The reality of her words was heavy, and the gravity of his own life, his rush for success, his obsession with wealth, felt empty by comparison. "I don't want your gratitude, Elliot," Renee continued softly. "I've done what I have done because it was the right thing, not because I expect anything in return. The world isn't kind to people like me, but I've never needed its kindness." Her words hung in the air between them, and Elliot felt something deep inside him shift. The realization hit him with quiet force. He had spent his life chasing things that didn't matter. In that moment, the walls he had so carefully built around himself began to crumble. Renee walked back toward the window, looking out at the night sky, where the city lights reflected the quiet hum of life moving forward. Elliot stood, a strange mix of emotions flooding him, respect, regret, and something else he couldn't quite name. He had always believed that he had everything figured out, that his money, his power, his influence could buy him anything. But now, as he looked at Renee, he realized how little he truly understood. He was about to speak when Renee turned to face him. "You have something valuable, Elliot, but it's not your wealth. It's your ability to listen. You just have to be willing to hear what's really being said." After their conversation, the air between Elliot and Renee felt lighter, but the tension wasn't entirely gone. Elliot had learned something invaluable that day, not just about Renee, but about himself. He had lived his life with so much focus on external success, thinking that wealth and power were the only markers of worth. But now there was an undeniable truth that had crept into his heart. He was empty. And the more he learned about Renee, the more he understood that true wealth wasn't something you could measure in dollars. In the following days, Elliot made a conscious effort to be less rigid, less controlling. He started to engage more meaningfully with his team, to listen to ideas outside of his usual circle, and even with Renee, he began to recognize her value beyond the shadows she had always lived in.
It was an odd thing to see. The hard-edged CEO, who once commanded rooms with cold authority, was now softened by the wisdom of a woman who had never asked for anything but quiet. Renee's quiet confidence had become an anchor for him, grounding him when everything else seemed to spiral. It wasn't just about business anymore. There was something deeper happening between them, a subtle connection that neither of them fully understood. They had shared moments, quiet moments, like the times after work when Elliot would linger just a little longer in the office, talking with Renee about anything and everything. They would talk about life, the lessons they'd learned, and the differences in their worlds. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, letting the peace between them speak louder than any words could. One evening, after a particularly long day of negotiations, Elliot found himself walking the hallways of the office, unable to shake the feeling that he hadn't yet fully addressed the inner conflict he had been facing for weeks. He knew he owed Renee more than just a thank you. He had to acknowledge her, not just as the woman who had solved the problem with the contract, but as the person who had transformed him in ways he wasn't ready to admit. She had shown him something that no one else could. As he turned the corner, he saw her pushing her cleaning cart down the hallway, a silent, steady rhythm to her steps. The evening light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor, and for a moment Elliot couldn't move. He just stood there, watching her. She looked up, catching his gaze, and smiled softly. Not the kind of smile she used when people were trying to thank her for her work, but the kind that reached her eyes, the kind that held understanding. "You okay, Mr. Lancaster?" she asked gently, her voice warm but not pressing. Elliot hesitated, the words coming slowly. I'm still trying to figure out what all this means. I've spent so much time focused on the wrong things." Renee nodded slowly, stepping closer to him. "We all do at some point. It's not about knowing everything. It's about learning to listen to what's really important." Elliot took a deep breath, feeling something inside him loosen. She was right. He had spent so much of his life pushing people away, burying his emotions under layers of control and ambition. But Renee, she had made him realize that he could still be powerful and vulnerable at the same time. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for something he hadn't been able to express. "I don't think I've ever really thanked you for everything you've done." Renee didn't say anything at first, just gave him a small smile. "You don't need to thank me, Elliot. I did what needed to be done. But I think maybe you're starting to understand now." Her eyes softened, and she turned, as if to leave, but then she stopped, almost as if waiting for him to catch up. Elliot felt his heart race. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't worried about how things would turn out. He just needed to be honest with himself and with her. "Renee," he called after her, taking a step forward. She turned back, and their eyes met. There was something in that look, something unspoken but understood. Without saying anything more, Elliot crossed the space between them and simply extended his hand. Not as a CEO, not as a man with all the answers, but as someone who had finally realized that his path to growth required connection. Real, honest, human connection. For a long moment, Renee didn't move, but then, with a slight nod, she took his hand. A bond was forged between them, one that wasn't about status or recognition, but about shared understanding, shared humility. The days that followed were marked by subtle changes. Elliot found himself more comfortable in his own skin, more willing to take risks, and even more willing to accept his vulnerabilities. He started opening up to his team about his own struggles, admitting that he didn't always have the answers, and surprisingly, they respected him for it. Meanwhile, Renee continued her work, but now there was a new energy between her and Elliot. She no longer felt like an outsider in his world. She had always known that the world didn't have to recognize her to make her valuable, but she had learned something important. Sometimes the most unlikely people can change the course of someone's life. There were still moments of discomfort, moments when old habits tried to resurface. But as time passed, Elliot and Renee found a delicate balance between the worlds they came from. Neither of them fully belonged in each other's world, but that was the beauty of it. They didn't need to. They had created their own understanding, their own connection. One evening, after the last of the office lights were switched off, Elliot found himself standing by the large windows of the conference room, looking out at the city skyline. The noise of the world outside felt distant, almost irrelevant. He wasn't worried about the next deal, the next promotion, or what the world thought of him.
Behind him, Renee was packing up her cleaning cart. She was leaving for the day, as she always did, but there was no longer the usual distance between them. She walked up to him, standing next to him in the quiet of the evening. "I think we're going to be okay," he said, more to himself than to her. Renee glanced at him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "I think you're right." For the first time in a long time, Elliot felt peace, real peace, deep within himself. It wasn't about success, money, or reputation. It was about being seen, being heard, and connecting with the people who mattered most. And for the first time, he felt truly grateful, not just for the deal that had been saved, but for the quiet wisdom that had come into his life, unexpectedly, through someone he never would have guessed. Renee hadn't just solved a business problem. She had helped him solve the biggest problem of all, himself. Days turned into weeks, and the fragile peace that had settled between Elliot and Renee seemed to be holding. There was a new dynamic between them, more respect, more honesty, and a sense of camaraderie that neither of them had expected. Yet despite the quiet connection that had formed, there was still an underlying tension, a fear that things could unravel at any moment. For Elliot, this newfound humility was still something he wasn't entirely comfortable with. He'd spent most of his life controlling every situation, pushing his own needs and desires forward with unrelenting force. But with Renee, it was different. She didn't demand his respect, and she didn't ask for anything in return. It was as if she had quietly slipped into his world, not as an outsider, but as someone who had always belonged there. She was no longer just the janitor. She was a trusted confidant, someone whose wisdom had altered his understanding of success and life. Yet this shift in their relationship left Elliot in a delicate spot. He couldn't fully acknowledge the bond that was growing between them. Part of him was still clinging to his old ways, the ways that had made him a CEO, a powerful, untouchable figure. There were moments when the fear of being vulnerable, of being seen for who he really was, overwhelmed him. He wasn't used to feeling so human. And that fear came crashing down one night, when everything seemed to fall apart. It started with a phone call from one of his closest advisors, Ben Morris, a longtime friend and business partner. Ben's voice on the other end of the line was tense, laced with urgency. "We've got a problem. There's been a leak. Someone inside the company has been talking to the competition about the Chinese deal, and it's not just small talk. This could sabotage everything." Elliot's stomach dropped. The weight of the situation crashed into him, and suddenly his world felt like it was spinning out of control again. This wasn't just about business. This was about his reputation, his legacy. Ben continued, "We've identified the source, and I'm afraid it's someone you've been trusting, someone you've brought in close. We're going to have to make a decision." Elliot stood frozen, his heart racing. He thought about all the people in his company he had trusted, the ones he had invited into his world. He couldn't fathom it, a betrayal right under his nose. It felt like a punch to the gut. But then, the cold truth hit him. It was Renee. Her connection to the monks, her quiet wisdom. He had been naive. There was no way she could have known the real stakes of the business world. Could she have been the one to betray him? The thought gnawed at him, twisting his insides. The next morning, Elliot couldn't look Renee in the eye. He walked past her in the hall, but this time it wasn't with the same quiet respect he had given her before. It was a distant, calculating look. He needed to get answers. His mind was racing, his heart conflicted. Renee felt the shift instantly. She had learned to sense these things, to feel the air around her change. The tension between them had been building, but now it was almost suffocating. She followed him down the hallway, her steps quiet but sure, until she reached his office. "Elliot," she said softly, trying to meet his eyes. "Is everything okay?" Elliot didn't answer first. He just stared at the floor, his fists clenched at his sides. He needed to know. He couldn't afford to be weak now, not after everything that had happened. "Renee, I need to know," he said, his voice suddenly cold, the vulnerability from days ago slipping away. "Are you the one who's been leaking information to the competition? Are you trying to sabotage this deal?"
Her eyes widened, her heart racing. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could he think that of her? After everything they had been through, after all the trust she had given him, this was how he saw her? "I would never do that to you," she said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Elliot, you've got it all wrong. I've never betrayed you. Before she could finish, he cut her off. "Then why was your name mentioned? Why is there a trail leading back to you?" The words stung, and for a moment Renee felt something inside her crack. She had never imagined that Elliot, the man she had come to trust, could ever think so little of her. The hurt and betrayal were written all over her face. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I don't know what's happening, Elliot. I've been here to help, not to harm. If you don't believe me, then maybe I should just leave." Elliot stood there, his chest tightening. He had said the words, but in that moment he realized something profound. He had let his fear dictate his actions. He had allowed his insecurities to push away the person who had stood by him when everyone else was ready to tear him down. Renee's eyes filled with tears as she turned and walked toward the door. But before she could leave, Elliot reached out and stopped her, his hand trembling as he touched her arm. "Renee, wait," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. She didn't turn around. "Why should I wait, Elliot? You don't trust me. You don't even believe in me anymore." His breath caught in his throat. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything." Renee shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not about losing everything, Elliot. It's about being honest with the people who matter. I've trusted you with everything, but I can't keep being treated like this." He stepped forward, his voice desperate. "Please, Renee, don't leave me. I need you." For a long moment, Renee stood still, her back to him, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She had given him everything, her trust, her wisdom, her strength, and this was the thanks she received? Was she supposed to keep forgiving him over and over again for the same mistakes? Finally, she turned to face him, her expression one of quiet resolution. "I can't be your safety net anymore, Elliot. I need to know that you see me for who I am, not just as someone you can use when it's convenient." With that, she walked out of the office, leaving Elliot standing alone, the weight of her departure crashing down on him. Elliot sat in his office long after Renee had walked out, the weight of her departure settling heavily in his chest. The room felt colder, more silent than it had ever had before. His heart raced as he replayed their confrontation over and over in his mind. He had accused her of betrayal, a woman who had only ever shown him kindness and honesty. He had pushed her away, and now she was gone. The realization hit him hard. He had lost her, not just as a colleague, not just as the woman who had saved his deal, but as the person who had transformed him. Renee had become the person he never knew he needed, the one who made him see his own weaknesses, his own flaws, and showed him the value of humility and connection. And now he had ruined it all. Elliot stood up abruptly, pacing around the room. He could still feel the sting of her words, the way she had turned away from him, and the raw pain in her eyes. He had let his fear of losing control take over, and in doing so, he had lost everything that truly mattered. The deal didn't matter. His empire didn't matter. What mattered was her. But he was at a crossroads. Should he swallow his pride and beg her to come back, to forgive him? Or should he let the pain of her departure dictate his actions and retreat into the safety of his world of power and wealth? The choice was not easy, but deep down, Elliot knew he had no choice but to find her. He couldn't let this go, not when she had become the one person he could truly trust, the one person who had seen through all his facades. Meanwhile, Renee sat in her small apartment, her heart heavy with the conversation she had just had with Elliot. She had left his office not out of anger, but out of a sense of self-preservation. The truth was, she had never wanted to be the object of someone else's emotional turmoil. She had always kept her distance, living a quiet life, because that was the life she knew best. But somewhere along the way, she had let Elliot in. She had trusted him, and he had betrayed that trust.
She could feel herself changing, growing stronger with every choice she made. And now, standing at the edge of her past and her future, she realized that it wasn't just about Elliot. It was about her. Had she been wrong to trust him? Perhaps. Had she given too much of herself to someone who would never see her as an equal? Maybe. But in the quiet stillness of the moment, she knew one thing for certain. She would not shrink back into the shadows. She had given Elliot everything she could, and now it was time to choose herself. As she wiped her tears, a slow, determined smile spread across her face. She was not the janitor. She was not the woman who existed to serve others. She was Renee, and she was enough. Back in the office, Elliot took action. He knew this situation was urgent, and every moment he waited was another moment he risked losing her forever. He grabbed his coat and rushed out the door, his mind set on finding Renee. He had to make things right. even if it meant humbling himself in ways he never thought he would. It wasn't about the apology anymore. It was about showing her, showing himself, that he was willing to change. He drove to the small apartment complex where Renee lived, his heart pounding with each mile. The city's streets blurred by, but Elliot's mind was focused only on one thing, her. He wasn't sure if she would even want to see him, but the possibility of leaving things unsaid, of walking away without truly facing the consequences of his actions, was unbearable. When Elliot arrived at the apartment complex, he took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. He hadn't fully prepared for this moment, but he knew he had no other choice. He couldn't go back to his old life, to his old ways, without first confronting what mattered most, and what mattered most was Renee. He knocked on the door, his heart racing as he waited. When it opened, Renee stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had been expecting him, yet there was a cool distance in her eyes. "I need to talk to you," Elliot said softly, his voice raw. Renee didn't immediately let him in, but after a long moment, she stepped aside. The room was small and modest, the kind of space she had always cherished for its simplicity. There was no luxury here, no grand display, just a woman who had found peace in the quiet, away from the chaos of the world. Elliot stepped inside, but he didn't sit down. He didn't try to fill the space with words. Instead, he simply looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a long time. "I was wrong," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was scared and I pushed you away when I should have trusted you. I should have trusted us. You didn't deserve any of the things I said." Renee didn't respond right away. She stood still, her arms crossed over her chest, weighing his words carefully. "I hurt you," Elliot continued, his voice breaking. "And I need you to know that I'm not just sorry for that. I'm sorry because I couldn't see you for who you really are until now. You're not just a janitor, Renee. You're a person who has changed me in ways I can't even begin to describe." Renee's eyes softened slightly, but she said nothing. She heard the apology, but she needed more. She needed to know that he understood. "I know you're not here for the praise, and I don't want to pretend like everything can just go back to how it was," Elliot continued, his eyes locking with hers. "But I want you to know, I see you. I see you, Renee, and I won't take that for granted again." There was silence in the room, a moment of stillness, and then, slowly, Renee unfolded her arms and took a small step toward him. Without a word, she reached out and placed the hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture that conveyed everything they had both been through, the struggle, the pain, and the possibility of healing.
For the first time, Elliot felt the weight of her touch, not as a reminder of his mistakes, but as a symbol of hope. The morning after their conversation, the sun rose gently over the skyline of New York, casting its golden light over the city. Inside the small apartment, there was a quiet stillness. The remnants of a difficult conversation still lingered in the air, but now there was something else. Peace. Elliot stood by the window, his mind racing, but for the first time in weeks, it was no longer filled with fear or anxiety. He had faced his demons, his pride, his insecurities, and in doing so, he had found clarity. It wasn't about success anymore, not in the way he had always defined it. The empire he had built felt distant, almost insignificant compared to the connection he had found with Renee. And then there was Renee, quiet, strong, and steady, with a wisdom that had shifted the course of his life. She had taught him the value of patience, of silence, and most importantly, of human connection. She had become a mirror reflecting the parts of himself he had always ignored. When he turned from the window, he saw her standing in the doorway, her eyes warm but measured. She had forgiven him, not just for his words, but for everything he had failed to see until now. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence was enough. But she did, with a soft smile. "You're different," she said simply, her voice gentle but knowing. Elliot nodded, his heart full. "I am, and it's because of you." Renee stepped into the room, the air between them lighter now. No words were needed. They both understood what had passed between them and what was to come. They weren't looking for some grand gesture. They were just two people, with their own histories, coming together in a moment of mutual understanding. Over the following weeks, Elliot began to transform in ways he hadn't imagined. He didn't just rely on his wealth and power anymore. He started to lead differently, listening more, understanding that the real strength lay not in being the loudest in the room, but in giving space for others to speak, to be heard. Renee, too, found a shift within herself. She no longer worked just in the shadows, but became a more active part of the team. Elliot made sure her contributions were recognized, not because she asked for it, but because she had earned it. He asked for her guidance on everything, from business strategies to personal decisions, knowing that her wisdom and perspective had a value that no dollar amount could ever match. Their bond grew stronger, not because it was perfect, but because it was built on a foundation of respect and shared growth. They were two people, each with their own scars and stories, learning from each other in a way neither had expected. The final Chinese deal, which had seemed so fragile just weeks ago, was now one of the company's most successful contracts. But it wasn't the financial success that mattered most. It was the way Elliot had learned to navigate the business world with humility. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was someone who valued the people around him, whether they were executives or janitors. The partnership with the Chinese conglomerate had turned into something bigger, an ongoing collaboration that promised not only growth, but meaningful connections. Elliot had found the true success wasn't about numbers. It was about creating a legacy of authenticity and integrity. Renee, standing beside him in a meeting with the company's partners, felt a quiet pride. She didn't seek the spotlight, but there was something comforting about knowing she had played a role in shaping the man Elliot had become. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. Her value was not tied to recognition, it was rooted in her own sense of self-worth. As the deal concluded and the final handshake was made, Elliot stood at the edge of the room, looking at Renee with a sense of quiet admiration. He could remember the first time he'd seen her, just a janitor, someone he had overlooked, someone he had dismissed without thought. He had underestimated her then, but she had shown him the power of patience, of listening, and of seeing beyond the surface. Now, as they stood side by side, he realized that the real deal wasn't just the one that had saved his company. It was the one he had made with himself, the choice to be better, to learn, to evolve. "I'm proud of us," Elliot said, his voice soft but filled with meaning. Renee nodded, her smile small but genuine. "We've come a long way." And they had. They had come a long way from the man who relied on wealth and control to the man who now understood the true meaning of strength. They had come a long way from the janitor who had never sought recognition to the woman who had changed his life in ways that words could never capture. Later that evening, as the office cleared out and the sun began to set, Elliot found himself standing by the window once more. He looked out over the city, but this time it didn't feel like an empire to conquer. It felt like a place to live, a place to make meaningful connections, to grow, to change. Renee entered the room, her presence a comforting weight. She didn't speak, but the quiet understanding between them spoke volumes. "I can't thank you enough, Renee," Elliot said, his voice full of gratitude. She smiled, her expression gentle but knowing. "You don't need to thank me. You've already done the hardest part. You've changed, and that's all that matters." With that, the two stood together in the silence of the room, knowing that their journey was far from over. They were not bound by their past mistakes, but by the understanding they had found in each other. And for the first time, both felt a sense of peace, of clarity, and of hope for what lay ahead.
A single text to the wrong number leads a pregnant Amaya to a stranger who won't walk away. But when she learns he's the CEO of the company denying her care, trust shatters, just as she's about to give birth. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sickness had finally subsided, but Amaya Blake's worries hadn't. At 7 months pregnant, her small apartment felt emptier than ever. The pale blue walls of what would become the nursery remained bare. No decorations, no crib, just a single rocking chair she'd found at a yard sale. "We'll make it work," she whispered, running her hands over her rounded belly. "Just you and me." At 29, Amaya had never imagined she'd be facing motherhood alone, but life had other plans. She still remembered the look on Derek's face when she'd told him the news, how his eyes had widened, how he'd mumbled something about needing air, how he'd walked out the door and never returned. 3 weeks later, he'd emptied their joint account and disappeared. No calls, no texts, no explanations. "Good riddance," Amaya said aloud, her voice echoing in the empty apartment. But sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, doubt crept in like a thief. Would she be enough for her daughter? Could she provide everything a child needed? The digital? Clock on her nightstand read 11:42 p.m. Another sleepless night. Outside her window, rain tapped gently against the glass, a soothing rhythm that couldn't quite calm her racing thoughts. Amaya reached for her phone, scrolling through her meager contact list. She'd moved 3 states away after Derek left, taking a job as an administrative assistant at a small tech company. The pay was decent, but the hours were long and she hadn't made many friends yet. Her thumb hovered over her cousin Melissa's name. They'd been close as children, but had drifted apart over the years. Still, Melissa had been the only one who'd called regularly since the move, checking in every Sunday without fail. Amaya set the phone down and walked to the full-length mirror in her bedroom. She lifted her oversized sweater, a soft grey one she'd splurged on last week, revealing her rounded belly. In the dim light, she looked different somehow. Stronger, maybe, or just more alone. On impulse, she picked up her phone again and snapped a photo. Her face wasn't visible, just her belly cradled in her hands wrapped in that soft grey sweater. She typed a message to Melissa. "I'm scared, but I'm trying to be strong for her." Her thumb hit send before she realized she hadn't checked the number. Exhaustion had made her careless. The message had gone to an unknown number, one she didn't recognize. "Great," Amaya muttered. "Just great." She was about to set the phone down when it buzzed with a reply. Her heart jumped to her throat. Who would respond at this hour? The message read, "You don't know me, but I think you're already stronger than you realize. Can I ask, would you ever let someone show up for you, even if it's a stranger?" Amaya stared at the words, reading them over and over. There was something about them, something honest and raw, that made her pause instead of immediately blocking the number. "I'm sorry," she typed back. "That message wasn't meant for you." The reply came quickly. "I figured, but my question still stands." Across the city, in a penthouse overlooking the skyline, Gideon Hart set his phone down on the glass coffee table and ran a hand through his dark hair. He hadn't meant to respond to the wrong number text. He wasn't even sure why he had. The photo had caught him off guard. A pregnant woman, alone, scared but trying to be brave. It had stirred something in him, memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Gideon walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city lights glittered below like fallen stars. From up here, everything looked small, manageable. But he knew better. Life wasn't manageable. It was messy and unpredictable and sometimes unbearably painful. His phone buzzed again. He hesitated before picking it up. "No one just shows up without wanting something in return," the message read. Gideon found himself smiling, a rare expression these days. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't naive. "Fair point," he typed back. "But what if someone just recognized something in your message, something familiar?" In her apartment, Amaya sat on the edge of her bed, uncertain why she was continuing this conversation with a stranger. It wasn't like her to be so trusting, but something about the responses felt genuine, lacking the creepy vibe she might have expected. "And what would that be?" she asked. "The sound of someone trying to be brave when they're terrified," came the reply. "I know it well." Amaya's breath caught. The words hit too close to home, piercing the armor she'd carefully constructed around herself. "Who are you?" she typed. "Just someone who's been alone too long," the stranger replied. "My name is Gideon, and I promise I'm not a serial killer or a scammer, just a person who saw your message and couldn't ignore it." Amaya hesitated, her thumbs hovering over the screen. Common sense told her to end the conversation now, but something else, something deeper, made her type. "I'm Amaya, and I'm having a girl in about 2 months. Her father decided fatherhood wasn't for him." She hit send before she could change her mind. Then, to her surprise, her phone rang. The same unknown number. Amaya stared at the screen, heart pounding. After 4 rings, she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," came a deep voice on the other end. "I shouldn't have called. It's just, sometimes texting feels too impersonal. But this is probably crossing a line." "It is," Amaya agreed, but she didn't hang up. "Why did you really respond to my text?" There was a pause, then. "My sister died in childbirth 3 years ago. She was alone when it happened. The baby, too. I wasn't there. I should have been, but I wasn't." The raw pain in his voice made Amaya's eyes sting with tears. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It's just, when I saw your picture, saw your message about being scared but trying to be strong, it reminded me of her. And I thought maybe this time I could—" He trailed off. "Be there?" Amaya finished for him. "Yes," Gideon admitted. "But I realize how strange this must seem. Amaya should have been frightened. She should have ended the call. Instead, she found herself asking, 'What was her name?' "Your sister." "Emma?" Gideon said, his voice softening. "Her name was Emma. They talked for over an hour." Gideon never asked for personal details, where she lived, what she did, anything that might have seemed intrusive. Instead, he asked about her pregnancy, if she had support, if she was taking care of herself. Amaya found herself sharing more than she had with anyone since moving. How she'd left her old life behind, how she was starting over, how sometimes the silence in her apartment was so loud it kept her awake. "I should let you sleep," Gideon finally said. "It's late, and you need rest." "Probably," Amaya agreed, surprised, to find herself reluctant to end the call. This was unexpected. Good unexpected or restraining order unexpected? There was a smile in his voice that made Amaya laugh, a real laugh for the first time in weeks. "I haven't decided yet," she said, "but I'm leaning toward good." After they hung up, Amaya lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Common sense told her to block the number, to chalk this up as a strange but ultimately meaningless encounter. But something else, something that felt a lot like hope, made her save the contact in her phone. She named it Wrong Number. At his penthouse, Gideon stood at the windows again, phone still in hand. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt a little lighter. He saved her number too, simply as Amaya. He hadn't told her who he really was. Gideon Hart, tech billionaire, founder of Hart Medical Technologies, the man whose face had graced the cover of Forbes 3 times before he'd withdrawn from public view after Emma's death. He hadn't mentioned the hospitals he'd built in her memory, or the maternal care foundations he'd established, or the fact that he hadn't had a real conversation with anyone outside his immediate staff in months. For once, someone had talked to him without knowing what he could do for them, without knowing he could buy and sell companies with a phone call, without seeing him as anything other than a voice on the other end of a wrong number. It felt real. The next morning, Amaya woke to the sound of her doorbell. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. Had Gideon somehow found her address? She peeked through the peephole to see a delivery man holding a large basket. Cautiously, she opened the door. "Delivery for Amaya Blake," the man said cheerfully. The basket contained prenatal vitamins, herbal teas for pregnancy, a soft blanket, and a stuffed elephant. There was a card that simply read, "For strength, G." No last name, no phone number. Just the initial. Amaya's phone buzzed with a text. "Too much? I realized after I sent it that it might seem creepy. I just wanted to do something helpful." She sat on her couch, running her fingers over the soft blanket. She should be freaked out. This crossed a line. "And yet, how did you know my last name and address?" she typed. The reply was immediate. "I didn't. I used a service that only requires a phone number. They find the delivery address. I never see it. If it makes you uncomfortable, I won't do it again." Amaya considered this. She should still be upset, but the thoughtfulness of the gift touched her. It had been so long since anyone had done something kind for her without being asked. "The blanket is nice," she texted back, "and I was running low on vitamins." That evening after work, Amaya's phone rang. Gideon again. This time she answered, on the second ring. "Is this going to become a habit?" she asked, trying to sound stern but failing. "Only if you want it to," Gideon replied. "I can stop." "No," Amaya said quickly, surprising herself. "I mean, it's fine, I don't mind." And so it began. Every evening Gideon would call. They'd talk about their days, about books they were reading, about nothing and everything. He never pushed for details about her life, and she never asked about his. It was as if they existed in a bubble separate from the real world. 2 weeks passed this way. Amaya found herself looking forward to the calls, to hearing Gideon's deep voice, to the way he listened, really listened, to everything she said. One night, as they talked, Amaya felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped. "What's wrong?" Gideon asked immediately, concern evident in his voice. "Just a cramp," Amaya said, but her voice was tight with worry. "It's probably nothing. Have you called your doctor? It's almost midnight. I don't want to bother." Another pain cut her off. "Amaya," Gideon's voice was firm, "call your doctor now, please." There was something in his tone that broke through her stubbornness. She promised she would, and hung up to make the call. The doctor advised her to come to the emergency room as a precaution. Amaya looked at the time, then at the rain pouring outside her window. The thought of calling a cab, of going to the hospital alone, made her throat tighten with fear. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gideon. "Are you okay? What did the doctor say?" Before she could talk herself out of it, she replied, "I need to go to the hospital, just as a precaution, but I'm scared." His response came immediately. "Tell me which hospital. I'll meet you there." Amaya stared at the words, a strange mix of relief and apprehension washing over her. She'd never met this man. She didn't know what he looked like, what he did, who he really was, but as another cramp gripped her, she realized something. She didn't want to be alone tonight. With trembling fingers, she typed the name of the hospital. "I'll be there," came Gideon's reply. "And Amaya, everything's going to be okay, I promise." As she called for a taxi, Amaya wondered if she was making a huge mistake. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel quite so alone, and sometimes that was enough. The emergency room buzzed with activity as Amaya sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone. The taxi ride had been nerve-wracking, each bump in the road amplifying her fears. What if something was wrong with the baby? What if she lost her daughter before she even had a chance to meet her? And beneath those fears ran another current of anxiety. She was about to meet a complete stranger, a man she'd spoken to only over the phone, whose face she'd never seen. Amaya Blake. A nurse appeared with a clipboard. "We're ready for you." As Amaya stood, another cramp seized her. She gasped, doubling over slightly. "Let's get you into a room right away," the nurse said, concern evident in her voice. They were halfway down the corridor when a deep voice called, Out, Amaya." She turned to see a tall man with dark hair and worried eyes. He wore jeans and a rumpled button-down shirt, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. His face was striking, not conventionally handsome, but compelling, with strong features and intense eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Gideon?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. His voice was unmistakable, even in that single word. He nodded, taking a step toward her before stopping, seemingly unsure of his welcome. "Sir, are you family?" the nurse asked. Before Amaya could answer, Gideon said, "I'm her friend. She shouldn't be alone right now." The nurse looked to Amaya for confirmation. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "He can come." In the examination room, Amaya changed into a hospital gown while Gideon waited outside. When he was allowed back in, he sat in the chair beside the bed, keeping a respectful distance. "Thank you for coming," Amaya said softly. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," Gideon replied simply. Then, with a small smile, "Though this isn't exactly how I imagined our first meeting." Despite her anxiety, Amaya found herself smiling back. "How did you imagine it?" "With less medical equipment, for starters." A doctor entered before Gideon could say more. Dr. Patel was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and an efficient manner. She examined Amaya thoroughly, asking questions about her pregnancy and medical history. "The good news," she said finally, "is that your baby seems perfectly fine. The heartbeat is strong and there are no signs of distress." Amaya nearly collapsed with relief. "And the cramps?" "Braxton Hicks contractions, most likely. False labor. But given your history and the fact that you're alone, I'd like to keep you overnight for observation." Amaya's face fell. An overnight stay would be expensive, and her insurance situation was complicated. Her new job's benefits hadn't fully kicked in yet, and her application for additional maternity coverage had been denied due to some technical issue. "Is that really necessary?" she asked. Dr. Patel's expression softened. "It's just a precaution, but yes, I believe it is." Gideon, who had been silent during the examination, spoke up. "She won't be alone tonight. I'll stay with her." Dr. Patel looked between them, nodded and left to arrange the admission. "You don't have to stay," Amaya said once they were alone. "You've already done more than enough." Gideon leaned forward, his eyes serious. "What's really bothering you?" "Is it the cost?" Amaya looked away. She hated talking about money, hated the vulnerability of admitting she couldn't afford something. "My insurance is complicated right now." "Let me help," he said immediately. "No." Amaya's voice was firm. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity if it's from a friend. Is that what we are?" "Friends?" Amaya asked, truly curious. "We've known each other for 2 weeks, through a wrong number text." Gideon was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think we're whatever we choose to be. Labels don't matter much to me." There was something about his directness that Amaya found refreshing. No games, no hidden agenda, just honest words. "I'll stay tonight," she decided, "but I'll figure out the bill myself." Gideon nodded, respecting her decision. "Then I'll stay too, just to keep you company." The night passed slowly. Amaya drifted in and out of sleep, aware of Gideon's presence in the chair beside her bed. He declined the nurse's offer to bring a cot, insisting he was fine where he was. In the dim light of the hospital room, with machines beeping softly. In the background, they talked more openly than they had over the phone. "Tell me more about Emma," Amaya said during one quiet moment. "Your sister." Gideon's face softened at the mention of her name. "She was the best of us. Kind, smart, always. Laughing. She got pregnant unexpectedly, but she was so happy about it. Her boyfriend, Ban, wasn't. He left early in the pregnancy. The parallel to Amaya's situation hung in the air between them. I was supposed to be there when she went into labor," Gideon continued, his voice tight. "But I was stuck in meetings overseas. Important business that couldn't wait, or so I thought. By the time I got the message that something was wrong, it was too late." "What happened?" Amaya asked gently. "Complications. Preeclampsia that wasn't caught in time. She and the baby both died before I could get there." He looked down at his hands. "I keep thinking that if someone had been with her, if she hadn't been alone..." Amaya reached out, touching his arm. It wasn't your fault. My head knows that. My heart is still catching up. He looked at her directly. That's why I couldn't ignore your text. It felt like a second chance somehow. The honesty in his eyes made Amaya's heart ache. This man carried so much pain, yet he'd rushed to a hospital in the middle of the night for a woman he barely knew. Thank you, she said simply. Morning came, bringing sunshine through the hospital blinds and good news from Dr. Patel. Amaya was free to go home, with instructions to rest and call immediately if the contractions returned. As they waited for her, discharge papers, Amaya's phone buzzed with an email notification. She read it, her face falling. What's wrong? Gideon asked. Just more insurance trouble, she said, trying to sound casual. The company denied my maternity coverage appeal again. Some issue with my application timing. Gideon frowned. Which company? Heart Medical Technologies. Amaya sighed. It's a big healthcare startup that my company contracts with for insurance. I've been trying to get through to someone who can help for weeks, but it's all automated responses. Gideon's face went completely still. Something flashed in his eyes, recognition, alarm, guilt, but was quickly masked. That's frustrating, he said carefully. Have you tried reaching out to their customer service directly? Amaya laughed, without humor. Multiple times. I get transferred around and eventually disconnected. It's like trying to talk to a wall. I might know someone who works there, Gideon said after a pause. I could make a call, see if they can look into it. You know someone at Heart? Amaya asked, surprised. That would be amazing, though I don't want to impose. It's no imposition, Gideon assured her. Let me see what I can do. Later, as they walked to Amaya's apartment building, Gideon had insisted on seeing her home safely. An awkward silence fell between them. They'd shared so much in the hospital, but now in the daylight reality was setting in. So, Amaya said as they reached her door. This is me, Gideon nodded, hands in his pockets. Nice building. It's not much, but it's home. She hesitated, then asked, would you like to come in? I could make coffee. The invitation surprised them both, but after spending the night together, albeit in a hospital room, it felt strange to simply say goodbye. I'd like that, Gideon said. Inside, Amaya's apartment was small but neat. The living room flowed into a tiny kitchen, with a short hallway leading to what Gideon assumed were the bedroom and bathroom. There were few decorations, as if she hadn't fully moved in yet. It's still a work in progress, Amaya explained, seeing him look around. I haven't had time to really make it homey. It's nice, Gideon said sincerely. Cozy. While Amaya made coffee, Gideon noticed a door slightly ajar. The nursery, he realized. Without thinking, he walked over and peered inside. The room was nearly empty, save for a rocking chair and a small bookshelf with a few children's books. No crib, no changing table, none of the usual baby furniture. I haven't had a chance to set it up properly, Amaya said from behind him, her voice defensive. I'm working on it. Gideon turned, seeing the coffee mugs in her hands and the vulnerability in her eyes. I wasn't judging, he said quickly. I was just curious. They sat on her small couch, drinking coffee and talking about safer topics, books they'd read recently, movies they'd seen, the unusually warm weather for the season. I should probably get going, Gideon said eventually, setting down his empty mug. You need to rest. Right. Amaya felt a pang of disappointment. Will we still talk? On the phone, I mean. Gideon smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. I'd like that very much. At the door, they faced each other awkwardly, neither sure how to say goodbye. Finally, Gideon held out his hand. It was nice to finally meet you in person, Amaya Blake. She took his hand, surprised by the warmth of his touch. Likewise, Gideon. Hart, he supplied. Gideon Hart. The name hung in the air between them. Amaya's brow furrowed. Hart. Like Heart Medical Technologies, he confirmed, his expression guarded. I should have told you sooner. I'm the founder and CEO. Amaya dropped his hand as if burned. You're the CEO of the company that's been denying my insurance claims? The one I've been fighting with for weeks? Gideon winced. I didn't know about your situation until you mentioned it today. I've been less involved in day-to-day operations recently. Less involved, Amaya's voice rose. Your company has policies that are hurting real people, people like me, and you're less involved. It's complicated, Gideon said, running, a hand through his hair. After Emma died, I stepped back from a lot of things. I still own the company, but I've let others handle the management. And those others decided that pregnant women don't deserve proper coverage. Amaya crossed her arms, anger replacing her earlier warmth. That's not what we... Gideon stopped, himself. That's not what the company stands for. I'll look into it personally, I promise. Why should I believe you? Amaya asked, hurt evident in her voice. You've been lying to me this whole time. I haven't lied, Gideon insisted. I just didn't tell you everything. A lie by omission is still a lie. They stood in tense silence. The connection they'd built over the past weeks suddenly strained. I should go, Gideon said finally. But I meant what I said. I'll fix this, not just for you, but for everyone affected. Amaya didn't respond, just watched as he walked away, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Alone in her apartment, she sank onto the couch, emotions warring within her. Part of her was furious at the deception, but another part remembered the man who'd sat beside her hospital bed all night, who'd shared the pain of losing his sister, who'd looked at her empty nursery without judgment. Her phone buzzed with a text. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. But everything else, our conversations, my concern for you, that was all real. Amaya didn't reply. Instead, she opened her laptop and searched for Gideon Hart. Dozens of articles appeared, along with images of the man she just had coffee with, though in the photos, he wore expensive suits and the polished look of wealth and power. Forbes called him the reclusive billionaire. The Wall Street Journal described him as a tech genius who disappeared from public view. And People magazine had once named him one of their most eligible bachelors. Gideon Hart wasn't just wealthy, he was a billionaire. A tech mogul who'd revolutionized healthcare technology before withdrawing from public life 3 years ago, right around the time his sister died. The more Amaya read, the more distant he seemed from the man she'd come to know. How could someone with that much power and money understand her struggles, the daily worry about bills, the fear of bringing a child into the world without a safety net? Her phone buzzed again. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to make things right. Amaya set the phone aside, too confused and hurt to respond. She needed time to think, to process everything she'd learned. As she moved to the nursery and sat in the rocking chair, hands cradling her belly, her daughter kicked, a strong, defiant movement that brought tears to Amaya's eyes. What do you think, little one? She whispered. Can we trust him? The baby kicked again as if in response. Amaya closed her eyes, remembering Gideon's words in the hospital, the pain in his voice when he spoke of Emma, the way he'd rushed to be by her side in the middle of the night. Billionaire or not, that concern had felt real, but now there was a wall between them, built of his omissions and her fears. Could it be breached? Did she even want it to be? As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty nursery, Amaya rocked gently, torn between her heart and her head, between trust and caution. And miles away, in his penthouse office, Gideon Hart stared at his unanswered text, wondering if he'd just lost something precious before it had really begun. 3 days passed without communication between Amaya and Gideon. 3 days of Amaya checking her phone more often than she'd care to admit. 3 days of Gideon drafting messages he never sent. On the 4th morning, Amaya received an email from Hart Medical Technologies. Her insurance appeal had been reviewed and approved. Not only would her maternity care be fully covered, but the policy had been retroactively applied to cover her hospital stay. At the bottom of the email was a personal note. This was never about you specifically. It was about a system I let run without oversight. I'm sorry. Amaya stared at the message, conflicted. Part of her was relieved. The financial burden lifted from her shoulders was immense, but another part felt uncomfortable, as if she'd accepted special treatment. Her phone rang. It was her cousin Melissa calling for their weekly check-in. How are you feeling? Melissa asked after they'd exchanged greetings. Pregnant, Amaya replied with a small laugh. Very, very pregnant. Only 6 weeks to go. Have you finished setting up the nursery yet? Amaya sighed. Not exactly. I've been meaning to, but work has been busy and I'm always so tired. You can't keep putting it off, Amaya. Babies don't wait for convenient timing. I know. Amaya ran a hand over her belly. I'll get it done. After chatting a while longer, Melissa asked, So, anything new? Anyone new? Amaya hesitated. Sort of. It's complicated. Ooh, complicated how? Spill it. For the first time, Amaya shared the story of the wrong number text, the midnight hospital visit, and the revelation of Gideon's identity. Wait, Melissa interrupted. Gideon Hart, the Gideon Hart, the billionaire. You've heard of him. Everyone's heard of him. He was all over the news a few years ago. Tech genius, healthcare revolutionary, and then he just disappeared from public view. And you're telling me you accidentally texted him a picture of your baby bump? That's the short version, yes. Melissa laughed. Only you, Amaya. So what happened after you found out who he was? Amaya explained about the insurance issue and how it had been resolved. And you haven't talked to him since, even though he fixed your problem? That's the thing, Amaya said, frustration evident in her voice. He only fixed it because it was me. What about all the other pregnant women dealing with the same issue? It's not right. There was a pause before Melissa responded. Have you checked the news today? No. Why? Maybe you should. After hanging up, Amaya searched for Hart Medical Technologies online. The most recent news article published that morning announced a major policy overhaul at the company. Hart was implementing new, inclusive maternity coverage guidelines, effective immediately and retroactive for the past 6 months. The company was also establishing a patient advocacy department to address coverage disputes. The article quoted an internal memo from Gideon Hart himself. We've lost sight of our founding mission to make healthcare accessible to all. That changes today. Amaya sat back, stunned. He hadn't just fixed her problem. He'd fixed the system. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your front door. Cautiously, Amaya went to the door and opened it. A delivery person was just walking away, having left a large box. Inside was a bassinet, simple, but beautiful, made of natural wood with a soft mattress and organic cotton sheets. The card read, "Every baby deserves a safe place to sleep. No strings attached. GPS, new number. Old phone had an unfortunate accident involving coffee and gravity." Amaya ran her hand over the smooth wood of the bassinet. It wasn't extravagant or flashy, just practical, thoughtful, exactly what she needed. Before she could talk herself out of it, she texted the new number. "The bassinet is perfect, thank you." His reply came almost immediately. "You're welcome. How are you feeling?" "Better. I saw the news about Hart Medical's policy changes. It was overdue. I've been too disconnected from the company. That's changing now." Amaya hesitated, then typed, "Why did you disappear?" "After Emma died." There was a long pause before his response. "Grief, guilt, the usual suspects. I threw myself into building hospitals in her name, but I couldn't face the day-to-day operations of my own company. It was easier to hide behind philanthropy than to actually be present." His honesty disarmed her. "And now?" "Now I'm trying to be present. It's harder than I remembered." Amaya smiled at that. Most worthwhile things are. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell back into their routine of evening phone calls. But now there was a new openness between them. The weight of secrets lifted. Gideon never mentioned the bassinet again, never used it as leverage to see her. Instead, he respected her space, content with their calls and occasional texts. One evening, as they talked about books they'd loved as children, Amaya mentioned her empty nursery. "I keep putting it off," she admitted, "partly because I'm exhausted all the time, but also, I think I'm afraid." "Of what?" Gideon's voice was gentle. "Of making it real. As long as the room is empty, I can pretend I still have time to figure everything out. Would it help to have company? When you're ready to set it up, I mean." Amaya considered this. The idea of facing the empty room with someone else by her side was appealing. Maybe. Yes. Just say when. The when came 3 days later on a Saturday morning. Amaya woke feeling surprisingly energetic and decided it was time. She texted Gideon, "Today's the day, nursery set up. If you're still offering," his response, "I'll be there in an hour, with breakfast." True to his word, Gideon arrived with bagels, fruit, and decaf coffee. He'd also brought tools, just in case. Amaya's living room now contained several boxes of baby items she'd ordered online but hadn't unpacked: a crib, a changing table, a small dresser. "I may have gone overboard with the online shopping," she said sheepishly. Gideon surveyed the boxes. "I think we can handle this. Where do you want to start?" They spent the day assembling furniture, arranging and rearranging the small room until it felt right. Gideon was surprisingly handy with tools, explaining that he'd built things with his father as a child. "He wanted me to know how to work with my hands," he said as he tightened the last screw on the crib. Said no amount of money could replace practical skills. "Wise man," Amaya commented, folding tiny onesies and placing them in the dresser. "He was. Both my parents were. They died in a car accident when I was 22. Emma was just 18. Amaya paused in her folding. "So you raised her?" "In a way, yes. Though she would have said she raised me." His smile was sad but fond. She was always the more responsible one, even though she was younger. As the afternoon wore on, the nursery transformed. From an empty space to a room filled with promise. The walls once bare now held simple decorations. A mobile above the crib, a small bookshelf filled with children's books, a soft lamp that cast a warm glow. "It's perfect," Amaya said, standing in the doorway with Gideon beside her, surveying. "Their work," almost, Gideon replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package. "One last thing." Inside was a delicate silver frame, holding a sonogram picture, Amaya's most recent ultrasound, which she'd mentioned during one of their calls. "How did you get this?" she asked, surprised. "I called your doctor's office." "Don't worry," he added, quickly seeing her expression. "I didn't use my name or influence. I just said I was a friend helping with the nursery and asked if they could email a copy. They checked with you first." Amaya remembered the call from the doctor's office, asking permission to send the ultrasound image to her friend. She'd agreed, without thinking much of it. "Thank you," she said softly, placing the frame on the small table beside the rocking chair. "It's the perfect finishing touch." They ordered pizza for dinner, eating it on Amaya's small balcony as the sun set. The day had brought a new ease to their relationship, the shared task creating a bond that transcended their complicated beginning. "Pentier, I ask you something?" Amaya said as they finished their meal. "Anything. That first night in the hospital, you said something about wanting to be there this time, about a second chance." She met his eyes directly. "What did you mean exactly?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "After Emma died, I couldn't forgive myself for not being there. I kept thinking that if I had been, things might have been different. She might still be alive." He looked out at the darkening sky. "When I got your text, saw your picture, it felt like the universe was offering me a chance to not make the same mistake twice, to be there for someone who needed support. Is that all I am? A chance at redemption?" "No," Gideon said firmly. "At first maybe there was an element of that, but now—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "Now you're Amaya, just Amaya. Someone I care about, not because of what happened in the past, but because of who you are." The sincerity in his voice made Amaya's heart beat faster. For the first time since Derek had left, she felt seen, truly, seen by someone. "I care about you too," she admitted quietly. "More than I expected to." Gideon reached across the small table, his hand finding hers. The touch was gentle, questioning. Amaya turned her palm up, intertwining their fingers in answer. They sat that way as night fell, holding hands in comfortable silence, the nursery behind them ready for new life, their hearts cautiously opening to new possibilities. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparations and growing closeness. Gideon became a regular presence in Amaya's life, stopping by with groceries, helping with last-minute nursery adjustments, even accompanying her to a doctor's appointment when she asked him to. He never pushed for more, never made her feel indebted for his help. He was simply there, present in a way Derek had never been, even before he left. At 8.5 months pregnant, Amaya waddled more than walked, her body preparing for the birth that was still weeks away. Or so she thought. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Gideon had just left after bringing dinner. He'd been teaching himself to cook, with mixed results that they'd laughed over together. Amaya was getting ready for bed when she felt it. A sharp pain followed by a gush of fluid. Her water had broken. Panic seized her. It was too early. She wasn't ready. She wasn't, and Gideon had just left. He was probably still on the road. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed his number. "Miss me already?" he answered, the smile evident in his voice. "Gideon," she gasped as another contraction hit. "My water broke. The baby's coming." "I'm turning around right now," he said, his tone instantly serious. "I'm 10 minutes away. Can you call an ambulance?" "I think so." The pain subsided momentarily. "But it's too early, Gideon. She's not supposed to come for another 3 weeks. Babies make their own schedules," he said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the fear she could hear underneath. "Call the ambulance, then stay on the line with me. I'll be there as soon as I can." Amaya called 911, explained the situation, and was told an ambulance was on its way. Then she called Gideon back. "They're coming," she told him, breathing heavily. "But I'm scared. What if something's wrong?" "Everything's going to be fine," Gideon assured her, though she could hear the tension in his voice. "Just focus on your breathing. Remember what Dr. Patel taught you." Amaya tried to control her breathing as another contraction seized her. They were coming faster now, more intense. "I don't think I can wait for the ambulance," she said, when the pain subsided enough to speak. "These contractions are really close together." "I'm 5 minutes away," Gideon said. She could hear the sound of his car accelerating. "Just hold on." The next contraction was so intense that Amaya dropped the phone. She could hear Gideon's voice calling her name, but couldn't respond as the pain washed over her. By the time she could reach for the phone again, she heard pounding on her door. "Amaya, it's me, let me in." Somehow she made it to the door, opening it to find Gideon's worried face. He took one look at her and knew. "We're not waiting for the ambulance," he decided, scooping her into his arms despite her protests that she could walk. "My car's right outside. We'll get to the hospital faster." The drive was a blur of pain and fear. Gideon broke every speed limit, talking to her constantly, keeping her focused on his voice rather than the panic threatening to overwhelm her. They reached the hospital just as another powerful contraction hit. Gideon carried her through the emergency entrance, shouting for help. Everything moved quickly after that. Nurses appeared, a wheelchair was brought, and Amaya was rushed to the maternity ward. Gideon followed, holding her hand until they reached the delivery room doors. "You'll need to wait here, sir," a nurse told him. "Are you the father?" Before Gideon could answer, Amaya gripped his hand tighter. "I want him with me," she said through gritted teeth. "Please." The nurse looked between them, then nodded. "Come with me then. We'll get you prepped." As they wheeled Amaya into the delivery room, Gideon leaned down and whispered in her ear, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time since this journey began, Amaya believed that someone would stay, that she wouldn't have to do this alone. "I know," she whispered back, just before another contraction claimed her. The delivery room was a flurry of activity. Nurses moved efficiently around Amaya, checking monitors, adjusting equipment, preparing for the birth that was progressing faster than anyone had expected. "The baby's coming quickly," Dr. Patel announced after examining Amaya. "She's eager to meet you." Gideon stood by Amaya's side, still dressed in his jeans and button-down shirt from earlier. A nurse had given him scrubs to put on over his clothes, and his hair was disheveled from the frantic drive to the hospital. "You're doing great," he told Amaya, holding her hand as another contraction seized her. "Just breathe." Amaya gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. When the contraction passed, she looked up at him, fear evident in her eyes. "What if I can't do this?" she whispered. "What if I'm not ready to be a mother?" Gideon brushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "You already are a mother," he said softly. "You've been taking care of her for months. This is just the moment you finally get to meet." His words calmed her, grounding her in the reality of what was happening. This wasn't just pain and fear. It was the beginning of something wonderful. "It's time to push," Dr. Patel announced. "On the next contraction, Amaya." What followed was the most intense experience of Amaya's life. The pain was overwhelming, but so was the determination. Gideon never left her side, his steady presence an anchor in the storm of sensation. "One more big push," Dr. Patel urged. "She's almost here." With a final, tremendous effort, Amaya pushed, and suddenly the pain gave way to a different sensation entirely as her daughter entered the world with a strong, indignant cry. "She's here," Dr. Patel said, lifting the tiny, squirming baby for Amaya to see. "And she's perfect." Tears streamed down Amaya's face as the nurses quickly cleaned the baby and placed her on Amaya's chest. She was tiny, but complete. 10 fingers. 10 toes, a shock of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. "Hello, little one," Amaya whispered, her heart expanding with a love so profound it took her breath away. "I've been waiting for you." She looked up at Gideon, expecting to share this moment of joy, but was startled to see tears streaming down his face. He made no move to wipe them away, seemingly unaware of them as he stared at the baby with an expression of wonder and grief so intertwined it made Amaya's heart ache. "Gideon," she said softly. He blinked, coming back to himself. "She's beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "So beautiful." Understanding dawned. This moment, a baby girl being born, must be bringing back all his memories of Emma, of the niece or nephew he never got to meet. "Would you like to hold her?" Amaya asked. Gideon looked startled. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." With trembling hands, Gideon accepted the tiny bundle. His large frame seemed to curl protectively around the newborn as he held her, a natural instinct that made Amaya's eyes fill with fresh tears. "What's her name?" a nurse asked, clipboard in hand. Amaya had been considering names for months, but had never fully decided. Now, watching Gideon holding her daughter with such tenderness, she knew. "Emma," she said. "Emma Blake." Gideon's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and something deeper, gratitude, perhaps, or a love he wasn't ready to name. "Are you sure?" he asked again, his voice barely audible. Amaya nodded. "I'm sure. Emma for your sister, a name with strength and heart, just what my daughter will need." The hours that followed passed in a blur. Emma was examined, measured, pronounced healthy despite being 3 weeks early. "She's small but mighty," the pediatrician declared with a smile. Amaya was moved to a recovery room, exhausted, but too filled with joy and adrenaline to sleep. Gideon stayed, making calls to ensure everything at the hospital was taken care of, bringing Amaya ice chips and adjusting her pillows with a tenderness that made the nurses exchange knowing glances. As night fell, Amaya finally dozed off, Emma sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her bed. She woke briefly when she felt a gentle touch on her hand. "I'm going to step out for a bit," Gideon whispered. "Get some coffee, make a few calls. I'll be back soon." Amaya nodded sleepily and drifted back to sleep. When she woke again, sunlight was streaming through the hospital window. Emma was still sleeping, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Amaya watched her, overwhelmed by the miracle of her existence. A nurse entered, carrying a tray with breakfast and a vase holding a single yellow rose. "Good morning, Mama," the nurse said cheerfully. "How are you feeling?" "Sore. Tired." "Amazing," Amaya replied truthfully. The nurse smiled. "That sounds about right. Your first day as a mother." Amaya looked around the room. Has Gideon been back? The tall gentleman who was with you yesterday. Nobody called to check on you both about an hour ago. He asked us to give you this when you woke up." The nurse handed Amaya an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on simple stationery. "Amaya, watching you bring Emma into the world was the most profound experience of my life. You were magnificent, strong, brave, everything your daughter will learn to be because of you. I stepped away because I realized something important. I don't want to be the man who steps in. I want to be the man you step toward. If you and Emma ever want more than just a birth partner, I'm still here. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. Gideon. Amaya read the note twice, her heart beating faster with each word. She understood what he was doing, giving her space, ensuring she didn't feel pressured or obligated after the intensity of the birth. It was a gesture of respect, of understanding. And yet, Emma stirred in her bassinet, making tiny noises that would soon become cries. Amaya reached for her, lifting her daughter into her arms with a confidence that surprised her. It was as if her body already knew what to do, how to hold this precious life. "What do you think, Emma?" she whispered, brushing a finger against the baby's soft cheek. "Should we make him wait? Or should we tell him the truth that we already chose him?" As if in answer, Emma's eyes opened, dark blue and seemingly all-knowing. Amaya smiled, her decision made. "Nurse," she called. When the woman appeared in the doorway, Amaya asked, "Could I borrow your phone? Mine is still in my purse and I need to make a call." The nurse handed over her cell phone with a knowing smile. Amaya dialed Gideon's number from memory. He answered, on the first ring. "Hello?" "It's me," Amaya said. "Where are you?" "In the hospital cafeteria," Gideon replied, surprise evident in his voice. "I wanted to be close in case you needed anything." "I do need something," Amaya said. "I need you to come back to the room." "Now?" "Right now." 15 minutes later, though Amaya suspected he'd run the whole way, Gideon appeared in the doorway. He looked rumpled and tired, as if he hadn't slept all night. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Emma's perfect," Amaya assured him. "Come here." Gideon approached the bed cautiously. Amaya patted the edge, inviting him to sit. When he did, she handed him his note. "I got this," she said. "I meant every word," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "I know you did, and I appreciate the sentiment, giving me space, not pressuring me." Amaya reached out, her hand finding his. "But I don't need space, Gideon. And I don't need time." He looked up then, hope and caution warring in his eyes. "What do you need?" "You," Amaya said simply. "Not because you're wealthy or powerful, not because you've helped me or been there for me, though I'm grateful for all of that, but because, somewhere between that wrong number text and this hospital room, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Amaya hadn't planned to say them, but once spoken, she knew they were true. Gideon's expression transformed, caution giving way to a joy so pure it made him look younger, unburdened. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I have since that first phone call." He leaned forward, his forehead touching hers in a gesture of such tenderness that Amaya's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "I've never done this before, being a mother falling in love with a billionaire." Gideon laughed softly. "I've never done this either, falling in love with a woman who accidentally texted me, being present for the birth of a child who shares my sister's name." As if aware she was being discussed, Emma made a small sound from her bassinet. Gideon immediately stood to check on her. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the baby. Amaya nodded, watching as he lifted Emma with the same careful tenderness he'd shown yesterday. He brought her to the bed, sitting beside Amaya so they were both looking down at the tiny face. "I think," Gideon said slowly, "what happens next is whatever we want to happen, whatever feels right for all three of us." "And what feels right to you?" Amaya asked. Gideon was quiet for a moment, considering. "Being together," he said finally. "Not rushing, but not waiting either. Building something real, something lasting." "I'd like that," Amaya said softly. "Very much." He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss, their first. It was brief, but filled with promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they parted, Gideon smiled. "So no making me wait." "No waiting," Amaya confirmed. "Emma and I already chose you. The moment you showed up at the hospital that first night, I think a part of me knew." "Knew what?" "That you were someone who would stay. Someone who would show up again and again. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to." Gideon looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep in his arms, her tiny hand curled around his finger. "She's going to have you wrapped around her little finger," Amaya observed with a smile. "She already does," Gideon admitted. "Both of you do." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Blake, the doctor will be in shortly to check on you and the baby." "Thank you," Amaya said. Then, hesitating only briefly, she added, "And could you update my contact information? In case of emergency, the person to call is Gideon Hart." The nurse smiled, making a note on her clipboard. "Relationship to patient?" Amaya looked at Gideon, a question in her eyes. He nodded, understanding passing between them without words. "Family," Amaya said firmly. "He's family." After the nurse left, Gideon carefully placed Emma back in her bassinet, then returned to sit beside Amaya on the bed. "Family," he repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Amaya said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It's been a long time since I've had a family. For me, too." Gideon wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "But I think we're off to a good start." As they sat together watching Emma sleep, Amaya thought about the journey that had brought them here. A wrong number text sent in a moment of loneliness, a response from a stranger that had changed everything. Some might call it chance or coincidence. But as Gideon pressed a kiss to her temple, as Emma sighed contentedly in her sleep, Amaya called it what it truly was: the beginning of their story. A story of two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose each other despite the odds, who built a family from the foundation of a single mistaken text message to the wrong number, with love. 3 months later, Amaya stood in the nursery of a new home, a comfortable house with a garden and a view of the park. Emma was growing quickly, her personality emerging more each day. She had Amaya's eyes and determination, already fighting to hold her head up, to see the world around her. Gideon appeared in the doorway, watching as Amaya rocked their daughter to sleep. He still looked at them both with wonder sometimes, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. They were taking things slowly, as promised. Gideon had helped Amaya find this house, close enough to his penthouse for frequent visits, but still her own space. He spent most nights here now, unable to bear being away from them for long. "She's finally asleep," Amaya whispered as Emma's eyes fluttered closed. Gideon crossed the room, his footsteps silent on the carpet. He knelt beside the rocking chair, his hand gently stroking Emma's dark hair. "I have something for you," he said softly, reaching into his pocket. "Both of you, actually." He pulled out a small velvet box. Amaya's breath caught as he opened it, revealing not a ring but a delicate gold locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny photo of Emma, her first official portrait. On the other side was the sonogram picture, the one Gideon had framed for the nursery all those months ago. "It's beautiful," Amaya whispered, tears in her eyes. "Turn it over," Gideon said. On the back was an engraving, "To the wrong number, with love." "I thought you might like to have it," Gideon said, "to remember how we started." "As if I could ever forget," Amaya replied, leaning down to kiss him softly. As they put Emma in her crib, as they walked hand in hand to the living room, as they built their life together day by day, they both knew the truth. Sometimes the wrong number leads to exactly the right person, and sometimes a single text message can change everything.